Hello, it's Loraine here, and before we get into today's podcast, let me tell you about School. It's the all-in-one platform that coaches, trainers and creators like us use to share content, engage our audience and build recurring revenue. Whether you're through free membership or paid subscriptions, think $10 to $50 a month or even high-ticket upsells. School makes it stupidly simple. There's highly engaged communities, no more ghost towns. Charge monthly or keep it free, you decide. Zero hidden fees. It's just $99 a month after your first 14-day free trial, and you can cancel at any time. Unlimited members, courses and content, all with mobile app to keep your community connected. And the best part, you own the relationship. No algorithms burying your posts. Just your people, your content, your revenue. Are you ready to build your empire? You can grab a free trial and I'll drop the link in the show notes or below the video. Let's get you paid for what you already know.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Mindset, Money, Success. And I'm your host, Loraine Marshall. And in today's episode, I am going to look at part of my first book where I explain what happened, the transcript of a meeting that was held 5 years ago in September. This meeting was meant to be a discussion based around a letter of his financial proposal and an email I had sent, which was my alternative proposal. And after the discard and the termination of the relationship, obviously there was things to be discussed. And I thought the best way forward would be to have a meeting to discuss things. Unfortunately, the meeting didn't go very well from the start. So I'm going to go over a few points of things that happened in that meeting now that 5 years has passed and my life has been impacted severely by the civil litigation for eviction and the criminal litigation for defamation, slander, harassment, revealing secrets, misappropriation, theft, and damages. So this is today's podcast, and it's been a while since I recorded any podcast because I didn't have access to a laptop. The laptop I had actually died on me completely in June, and so I haven't been able to record any episodes. So this is a welcome back type of episode, and let's get into it. So right at the start of the meeting, we had agreed that we could record the meeting. First of all, I was actually fearful that he would be angry and abusive because I had already had experience of his anger in the past. And then just before we had this meeting, there was some texts that were exchanged. And in those texts, I could tell that he was already angry. And he agreed that I could record this meeting. The other thing that I thought would be that anything that was agreed would be able to be transcribed and taken to a notary so that we could sign up to the things that we agreed. So in the first few sentences, I'm looking to get my iPad so that I can look at the email and the proposal that I had sent him. And so straight away, he shuts me down by saying, hang on before you find it.
is what he says. And so I couldn't actually go to my iPad and open up that email and couldn't then discuss the contents of the email because he started to speak first, saying, you need to be absolutely clear about what I want and need, because reading through this document you put together, I don't really think you've listened at all to what I need. Or maybe I haven't made it clear enough. So I need to make it clear to you what I want and what I need. And then you need to go away and think about it, because the first thing I want is I want to break off, terminate, get rid of all my financial, physical obligations and commitments to you. I want it to stop. So those were his words. Now, when he says you need to go away and think about it, obviously I had already had time to think about it, because this was the 15th of September and he had written his proposal on the 29th of August. And in between of that time, he had paid for a breakthrough therapy coach. And I had that 2-day coaching session with the same coach he had seen in the few weeks before. So basically, I'd already thought about it and I'd already written the proposal. So there was no need for me to go away and think about anything, because I'd already done it and I'd already written it up. But obviously he wasn't happy about anything that I'd put in this proposal. So then he said, I want a clean break. That's what we said. That's what we discussed. And that's what I want. That's what I want, a clean break. Now, obviously, he didn't get a clean break because I was being threatened, and then I was told not to move out of the house by my legal representative that I had, the legal advice that I sought. It just escalated from this point forward. And we hadn't actually agreed, and we hadn't actually discussed anything about the wanting a clean break. That never happened. And then in the next part, he says, we don't communicate terribly well. Well, it took me a while to figure out that, no, I couldn't communicate with him very well, because I had tried on a few occasions from 2018, when I was going through anxiety and trauma after he confessed to an affair. I realised that after he'd left, he would use verbal aggression in order to silence me. So anytime that I actually tried to have a conversation, he would raise his voice, he would say something nasty, he would be angry. And so, yeah, I couldn't communicate very well because of the way he behaved when I tried to communicate with him. I've got this clip. I can play that clip.
The point is, you haven't considered me and what I want, because that's not generally what you do. Now I'm telling you what I want. I want it over and done with. Stay friends, let's stay friends, but I want it over and done with. I do not want to be hanging on to investments in your house or anything else. Not at all. It's a terribly, terribly, terribly bad idea. And it isn't going to.
So
That was how I was spoken to. My ideas were terrible and weren't going to happen. But also when he says, if we can stay friends, let's stay friends. Well, that was a totally unrealistic option after how he'd spoken to me in the discard and how he speaks to me in this 15th of September meeting that we had. So that remaining friends wasn't an option. In the next clip, he's talking about the money that he wants. And so let's listen.
Second thing is, that was what I need. Now I'll tell you what I want. I want to get 115,000 euros out of this. I'd like to get back what it's costing, which would be about 250,000 euros, but that ain't going to happen. Unless I cut you off with nothing.
So basically saying that unless I cut you off with nothing, and actually that is exactly what he did. He cut me off with nothing. If I just read this next section where he's raised his voice and he's just threatened with giving me 24 to 48 hours. And I'm asking 24 to 48 hours of what? And then he says, to get out of here after what you fucking put up on that bloody internet. You still don't seem to understand how deeply offensive it was. Again, you seem to lack any empathy for me at all. So he's basically presenting his financial offer from the letter, and he's going to change it slightly. He's presenting it in a different way. So he says it's the same amount of money. This is what he says. It's the same amount of money. The thing is, Loraine, the other bit you seem to not quite got here is you do not negotiate a gift. You cannot negotiate a gift. You can't do that. So what he's done, he said it's a financial settlement, but he's termed it as a gift. And so later on, he then sets the deadline. So he says this. So here's what I propose to do. I propose we set a deadline of the 15th of January. And what he means is he's just set the deadline of the 15th of January without asking me. So then he says, I'm actually in total shock by this point. I've been my stomach's churned. I'm really not able to string any words together. And I just think to myself, what am I supposed to do in 4 months? So he goes on and he says, and by the 15th of January, I want this over with. One way or another, this is going to be over with. I've explained what I'm going to do, and then I'll explain what the various options are. And then I just want to check that you've understood. And I'm saying, yeah, well, I've got this recording, so I will be able to understand. I've got it recording. So he keeps saying, if we agree. And I'm thinking, well, how can I agree to anything? I haven't had a discussion of it. He's basically informing and laying down what he wants, what he needs, and I'm meant to agree. And then he says, if you agree and you agree to behave as I've requested. And I'm saying, what's behave as you requested? And he starts raising his voice again and shouting that you don't do stupid stunts like this thing you did with GoFundMe. That you take care of the house, that you don't get in the way of selling it, that you behave decently and treat the house with respect and treat me with respect. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, is he treating me with respect? And he goes on to say that he's put other people first most of his life, and now he's putting himself first. And he says, and unfortunately, you are a bit of collateral damage on that. So that's what I ended up as, piece of collateral damage. And it wasn't easy for me either. And so in the next section, it's I can play a clip where he is telling me about the 4 months. So in this clip, he's actually telling me that I've got 4 months, and if I haven't bought it and if the house isn't sold, I'm going to be out.
If you don't buy it on the 15th of January, if the place isn't sold by the 15th of January, I am moving back in on the 16th of January. You've got 4 months in this house. And if you haven't bought it, and if it isn't sold, I'm moving back in. And you are out on the 15th of January at the latest. And I'll gift you that money when you leave.
So part of it was that the money would be gifted after I leave. Now that is what he said in his original letter. And that gave me a lot of concerns, because how could I trust a man that had been untrustworthy, who would deceive me, who would lie to me? So how could anyone trust a man who had already been unfaithful and deceptive, to think that that would happen? Leaving before receiving the money wasn't something that I was able to do. I wasn't working. I didn't have any job. I had about 3,000 in savings in the bank, and I was just basically left in the house. After he left, I was suffering grief, shock, traumatized, couldn't even sleep at night, and was in fear and had no clue how I might move forward. And then obviously things escalated past that point. This next clip was what English-speaking Spanish solicitor actually heard when I had the first legal advice. And he gave me the advice to file a gender violence complaint after he heard this part of the recording.
Why not the next gender? Because you can't negotiate with me, Loraine. I've just told you why. It's my choice. I'll make it the 15th of fucking November if I want to. Don't fuck about with me. I've told you 4 months. I've told you the 15th of January. You asked me why? I said because of Christmas. Do not push your luck. Do you understand me?
And so that was the clip the solicitor heard. But also, when he gave his testimony in the criminal court, his testimony said, we had a meeting where I tried to explain to her that she had no legal right to remain in my house. Well, that was how he tried to explain. So after he's banged his hand on the table, he then says, don't take the piss out of me. You've had 1 strike already, and you were that far away to have your effing suitcase thrown out the effing door. So just be careful how you tread. Like I've said to you this afternoon, your future security depends on having me on your side. So don't alienate me. And I've told you already, you can't negotiate a gift. So I'm telling you how it's going to be. You have various options open to you. Help me sell this place, buy it yourself, or just sit here until the 15th of January and F off, or any permutation of those three. So that was how he was speaking to me in that meeting, which was meant to be two adults having a conversation about two financial proposals, his settlement offer and my proposal. And it just didn't go anywhere like an amicable ending. And I don't know how he thought that we might remain friends after the way he spoke to me. So a little bit further into the meeting, and he is now referring to the GoFundMe, which he said at the beginning that he wasn't going to refer to. And so he then says, well, the punctuation is shit and the spelling is shit, but worse than that, it's disgusting. Saying stuff like that, it's disgusting. How would you feel if I said something about you like that, if I slurred you? Well, first of all, it's not a slur if it's true. And I think that all that was in the GoFundMe was that my life had been shattered and that he had cheated, which he had done. Not for the first time, because this was the second occasion that he then confessed about another woman, only this time he was completely ending our relationship, because his 4-sentence discard speech started off with, I've got something to tell you. I'm in love with another woman. We can remain friends if we want to remain friends. We just can't have sex anymore. So that was how our relationship was ended, in 4 sentences. And so now he's now angry that I've said that my life is now shattered and I'm looking at what to do. But I had already been threatened by him. He offered his letter and I started looking at lots of houses online, hundreds of places that I was considering. And then within days after there'd been a viewing at the house, he stormed into the bedroom and accused me of saying something negative. This was the 4th of September. And he was right in my face, shouting at me, telling me, don't F about with me. I'm in control. You do as I say, or I can throw you out onto the streets. And so I was already in a place of fear before this meeting on the 15th. So I was treading around, trying to keep out of the way and making sure that I didn't upset him any further. And the reason why he came into the bedroom like that was because the agent I had instructed had gotten feedback from the clients and then rang him with the feedback. And the feedback was because I had said that I can hear the lorries go down the motorway at 6 in the morning, which is true. It's a fact. And apparently that was something negative to put the clients off. So he's obviously very annoyed and angry, and he is now saying that I was slurring him. And he says, I'm calling him names all over the internet. I'll not repeat what it was because it wasn't very nice. And I said, no, I never used those words. And he just then says, but you might as well be. Actually, what it does, it shows you up for the loser that you are. That's what that does. It shows you up for the loser that you are. And he goes on ranting about the GoFundMe page that I'd put together, because my idea that I'd actually discussed with the transformational coach that he'd paid for, in order that I could look at how I wanted to move on with my life after he's just terminated everything and said that, you know, he was in love with another woman. I discussed things about what I might do, because I thought, well, I'm already here in Spain. I'm already here on a property. If he's offering 50% of the value of this property, why don't I look to see if I can raise that money and then buy him out and remain here? Because I could start a retreat business and have people come here where we could do art and yoga, and, you know, I've got the pool, and, you know, go for walks in the countryside and things. So that was the idea. Only, obviously, anything that I actually think about, anything that I'd actually tried to do in the past, was always criticised, made to feel that it was not a good idea, that I rush into these things, that, you know, anything that I've attempted was always, I was belittled, or it was, you know, pushed down any inspiration at all. So in this part, is saying, I never said you could advertise my house as a spiritual retreat on the bloody internet and say a load of crap about my infidelity. It's and ripping your life to bits. It's appalling. It's disgusting. And if you do anything like it again, I'll be back to thinking, should I give you 24 hours or 48? Don't think for a moment that I'm going to be a pink fluffy dom. This is just a reference to something that I used to say in the early days when we first got together. Because it will happen quickly and it won't be pleasant. And I'm not making an idle threat. I'm informing you of what will happen if you pull another stunt like that. And you better think through very carefully how I might react to things. You better think that through. And then I try to speak and he interrupts, and there's another angry outburst where he is shouting at me that he doesn't give a fuck what anyone else thinks. And then the next section is what was written in the police report when I went to the 𝐌𝐤𝐬𝐧𝐞𝐬 station in October 2020, which was the advice I was given by the Spanish lawyer. And I'd reported to the police that it was emotional and psychological abuse. And the translator that I had at that police station picked up on a sentence in the recording when I started to play it, and said that was verbal abuse. And so the report that went into the gender violence court wasn't emotional and psychological abuse at all, because that's a pattern of behaviour over years. Now I could go back to 2014, 2016, 2018, and onwards. So basically, I did have a lot of things that happened over the span of the relationship. So in this is what he's saying in very loud, angry voice. They're actually not going to give you feedback and say, actually, you look like a fucking bleeding heart, postmenopausal, sad old bitch who's just been fucking dumped on her own again. So that was the sentence that was then written into my statement that went into the gender violence court 2 days later in October of 2020. And at that point in time, after the court, the judge said she couldn't do anything. It was COVID restrictions still in 2020, and she couldn't bring him back. So he was obviously not in Spain, and then they couldn't do anything because normally they would have the person straight into the court and then questioned about what happened. But that wasn't part of why I felt threatened. That angry outburst where he's shouting at me wasn't why I felt threatened. Why I felt threatened was because of him telling me he could throw my suitcases out of the door. That was what were putting me in fear, because I knew that he had already told me I was precarious here. I didn't understand when we got together that I was like vulnerable in the situation I was. I had my own business when we first met. I was earning a lot of money. I was an independent businesswoman. And then after I moved here to Spain, I started to become more isolated from what was going on in the UK. And I sold out of my business and decided I would put the money into starting online business. And so I'd already tried to attempt to earn another independent income. Unfortunately, everything that I had attempted to earn an income didn't work, and never actually got to a position where I was earning independent income. One of the situations that had an implication was in December of 2017, because I'd invested in an education platform in order to learn digital marketing and affiliate marketing. And then by the December of 2017, he confessed to starting an affair 4 weeks before, in the November of 2017. He told me about this woman called Karen, who was in the UK, that he knew apparently in 2009, and that he talked about before when we first met, and he called her his Wednesday girl. Now, honestly, I had no idea what was going on, but obviously after he confessed to that, I was in another situation of anxiety and grief. And looking back now, you can understand, I knew after he'd left that what he was doing was the devaluation. He obviously didn't really want me to earn an independent income. And that was how he devalued the attempt that I was making to earn an independent income. That was it. So this is part of the book that I wrote after he left. It was April of 2021 before I felt strong enough to actually start to write this book. I wrote out the chapters in chronological order, and then bit by bit I started to construct the chapters of the relationship, from how we first met, how the relationship unfolded, and then how it ended, and then what happened in the post-separation, and how he spoke to me in that meeting in September 5 years ago now. And the civil court hearing took place in 2022, even after we had attempted more, I think it was 7 negotiations And on the 7th negotiation, we actually signed an agreement because there was a buyer who came forward who was ready to pay a deposit. And so we met. He was actually in Spain. He'd brought his new wife, and we met in a bar in the port. And so at that point, he said he had someone to introduce to me. He wanted to introduce me to his wife. And I looked and said, that's not what I'm here for, and walked to the table and sat down. I wasn't there to be introduced to his new wife, who he'd married 6-7 months after he left. That's not what I was there to do. But we did get an agreement signed in July of 2021. And I already knew that he'd started eviction proceedings, but I didn't quite understand the significance of the eviction proceedings being started throughout the negotiation attempt, because that's bad faith negotiation. If you're going to negotiate and settle things, why start civil procedures right in the middle of the negotiation attempt at the point that the agreement was reached? That's when he did it. In fact, it wasn't until later, and I've recently found more documents, he instructed a lawyer before May of 2021, and we'd already reached the agreement in April of 2021. And I actually then sacked the mediation company because I was lied to and tricked, where they didn't make the payment, or the first payment that was meant to be due. So in the meeting that we had in July, the first point that was agreed was that he would put a stay on the eviction proceedings, and the payment and the settlement that was agreed, we both signed to, was for £40,000. And that obviously was a massively reduced sum, because originally it had been 50% of the property, and it was €115,000 at that time. And so I just had this thought that, look, the 40,000, just take that money, because you've got the opportunity to rent something. And I would have been able to keep my UK property, because the settlement or the redemption figure for that UK property was down to about 25,000. There was only a matter of years to go before that property was actually repaid. So I thought, well, if it's redeemed, then at least I would have a stable, secure income from the rent. Unfortunately, because of everything that happened, because he refused to negotiate and went through litigation instead, and forced through precarious eviction, and then forced through the allegations, the 7 allegations. The whole thing from 2020 is dragged out 5 years. So it's the 5th anniversary of the negotiating meeting that was held in this property back on the 15th of September 2020. And I can tell you now that I have lost everything that was meant to be my secure future. And the trauma that I've experienced in the 5 years has been huge. I've actually had 4 different therapists while I've been going through this. I actually sold my property in 2022 because I was looking at a way forward, and I thought, well, I understood that I could be evicted at any minute, that public appointed lawyer had told me that the judge would order my eviction. And so because I didn't have an income, because I didn't have a job in 2022, I decided I would sell that property, because then I thought at least I would be able to just leave, find somewhere to go and start my life afresh. But before I had that opportunity, it was a matter of 2 weeks after receiving the cash lump sum from the sale of the property that the Guardia Civil were at the gate and handing me a document to go to the court to pick up the 7 criminal allegations. And so from 2022 all the way through to October of 2024, I was under the court proceedings, a criminal court, where his Barcelona lawyer had requested maximum penalties for all of these allegations, and those penalties added up to 17 years of prison. And so on top of the eviction trauma, and I had the prison sentence hanging over us, and also in the late December of 2022, I was given a message from my family in the UK telling me that my youngest daughter had died suddenly, and that grief again was impacting all of my life and caused huge, massive trauma moving forward into 2023, while I was under suspicion of all of these crimes at the same time. So I'm really lucky that I was able to pay for a lawyer in Madrid to help defend me against these allegations. Now, I understand that the European courts have put in place anti-SLAPP laws in Europe, so that people with money who want to claim defamation, civil or criminal, have to prove first, and solicitors have to look at their allegations and have to prove first before they can take this into court. And if a victim, survivor, is accused of civil or criminal defamation, then the first thing that they can do is to strike it out, so they don't have to go through this whole process of litigation, because there's a way to put your case straight away to say that it's a SLAPP litigation under the anti-SLAPP legislations that are coming through now. Hopefully things will improve for victim survivors who actually want to speak about what happened to them, post on social media about what happened to them, or even write their own stories and publish the books. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode, and hope you can tune in to next week's episode. Not sure what the topic's going to be, and I am looking out to interview other women who are published authors. So hope to see you again on another episode of Mindset, Money, Success.